The house on Carver Street was never cold, not truly. There was always a fire going in the parlor, always the smell of wood smoke and the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. But Genevieve had learned, in the 4 years since she had become Mrs. Sutton, that warmth in a house and warmth in a marriage were entirely different things. One you could tend with kindling. The other required something that William had never once offered her. She had been 23 when her father arranged it. Not a cruel man, her father, simply a practical one. The Suttons had land north of Kingston, and the Moores had a daughter who had grown too old, in his estimation, to wait for love. So the thing was done. There was a modest ceremony at St. George's in the autumn, chrysanthemums on the altar, her mother pressing a handkerchief to her eyes, for reasons Genevieve had never quite sorted out, whether grief or relief, she couldn't say. William Sutton was not unkind in those first months. He was merely absent. He had his law practice in town, his Thursday dinners at the club, his opinions about matters that did not include her. He provided. He was civil at the supper table. When she spoke, he listened with the patience of a man enduring weather, waiting for it to pass so he could go on with his day. Genevieve had told herself this was enough. She had watched enough marriages to know that fondness could grow where love had not been planted. She kept his house the way it should be kept. She managed the accounts he left her to manage, ordered the firewood, corresponded with the tenants on the north property when he was too busy to write. She learned which chair he preferred in the evening, how he took his tea, that he disliked the sound of the piano after 9 o'clock. She made herself useful because she could not make herself loved, and usefulness, at least, was something she understood how to do. What she did not understand, until the night of the 14th of November, was that William had never once seen any of it. It had been a dinner party, nothing unusual. William entertained his colleagues from the firm every few months. 4 or 5 men in good wool suits who drank his whiskey and argued about tariffs and laughed too loudly at their own stories. Genevieve had spent 2 days in preparation. She had ordered the good china brought up from the cellar, consulted with Mrs. Drummond about the menu, pressed the linen herself because the laundress had left spots on the last tablecloth, and William had noticed. She had arranged flowers from the conservatory, white and pale yellow, and she had dressed carefully in the blue silk that William had once said was becoming. Though he'd said it, the way a man might comment on the weather, without particular feeling. The dinner went well. It always went well when Genevieve ran the table. She knew how to steer conversation away from politics when tempers rose, how to signal Mrs. Drummond with a glance, how to make every man in the room feel that he was the most interesting person present. It was a skill she had developed the way one develops any skill that nobody else notices, through years of quiet effort and no acknowledgement whatsoever. After the dessert course, she had excused herself. The men would want their port and their talking, and she had learned it was better to absent herself than to be visibly tolerated at the table's edge. She went to retrieve her shawl from the sitting room adjacent to the dining room, and she did not knock because there was no reason to knock. It was her sitting room, in her house, and she did not expect anyone to be there. The door was slightly ajar. She heard them before she saw them. It was Mr. Aldridge speaking first. Genevieve had always found him the most tolerable of William's colleagues, quiet, careful with his words. But he was not being careful now. "You are a fortunate man, Sutton. That table tonight, the wine, the flowers, all of it, arranged without a word of complaint." There was a pause, the sound of a glass being set down. "Yes," William said. "She's very good at that." Another voice. Genevieve didn't place it. "A useful woman then." Useful. The word came with something in it, a kind of lightness. Like a well-kept ledger. Everything in its place. Nothing missing, nothing particularly interesting. Laughter, not cruel, which somehow made it worse. It was the laughter of men who found something mildly amusing, the way you might laugh at a dog that had learned to shake hands. Impressed, faintly but not moved. She stood in the hallway with her hand still raised toward the door. She had not opened and she did not breathe. She understood, standing there, that William had just described 4 years of her life. 4 years of early mornings and careful management and silent accommodation and nothing, a well-kept ledger. Nothing particularly interesting. She lowered her hand. She did not go back to the dining room. She went upstairs instead, to the bedroom, and she sat at the edge of the bed in the blue silk dress, and she sat there for a very long time. She did not leave that night. She wants to be clear about that, looking back. She did not act on feeling alone. She sat with it for 3 days, the way you sit with a wound to see whether it will close on its own. She went through the motions of those 3 days. Breakfast, correspondence, the Tuesday call on Mrs. Aldridge, that she could not cancel without raising questions. Supper, The tick of the clock. William's boots on the stairs. She watched him across the supper table, and she thought, "He does not know that I heard him. He does not know because it would not occur to him that there was anything in those words that needed to be hidden." That was the thing that settled it, in the end. Not rage, not grief. A kind of clarity that came quietly, like frost coming in the night. You don't see it happen, but by morning the whole landscape has changed. On the third day, she wrote a letter to her cousin Philippa in Halifax. Philippa was 8 years older than Genevieve, unmarried by choice, and ran a small lending library out of the lower floor of the house she had inherited from their great-aunt. Genevieve had always considered her faintly eccentric. She understood now that Philippa was simply free. She did not explain everything in the letter. She asked whether there was work she might do, whether there was room, whether Philippa might be willing to have her. She asked in the particular way women ask things when they cannot quite say what they mean, with so much careful circumlocution that the meaning was, she hoped, entirely apparent. Philippa wrote back in 5 days. The reply was 6 lines. "Come as soon as you can manage. The east bedroom is yours. I have more cataloging than I can do alone. Don't bring more than you can carry. You'll want your hands free. And don't tell your father until you're already on the train." Genevieve read it twice. Then she folded it very small and kept it in the lining of her winter gloves, where William would not look. She needed 6 weeks to prepare, though she told herself she would do it in 3. There were practical matters. She had $12.40 in the small account her mother had opened in her name before the wedding. The account William did not know existed because he had never asked, and she had never told him. It was not enough. She began to think carefully about what was enough and what that meant in practical terms. She sold 3 things. A brooch she had brought into the marriage from her own family, which William had never noticed her wearing or not wearing. A set of illustrated volumes from the sitting room shelf, Natural History, Edinburgh editions, which she replaced with lesser copies from a second-hand bookseller on Princess Street, and William, who had not opened those books in 4 years, did not notice the difference. And the pearl drop earrings her mother had given her at the wedding, which she had loved, and which she pawned on a Wednesday afternoon while William was in court. She did not feel guilty about this. She had managed his household for 4 years on less than he spent on his club dues, and she had done it without complaint and without credit. She decided these things were not theft, they were unpaid wages. By the first week of December, she had $47. She had a train ticket to Halifax booked under her maiden name. More. A ticket purchased at the station on a morning when William expected her to be at the milliner's, and she had been, briefly, before the station. She had packed a single trunk, the practical things, not the beautiful ones. Her warmest clothing, the small photograph of her mother, her grandmother's recipe journal, which no one else would want, but which she had always meant to keep. 3 books she had bought herself and no one had given her. She did not pack the blue silk dress. She left on a Tuesday. She chose Tuesday because William had his weekly luncheon at the firm on Tuesdays and would not return until 3:30. Mrs. Drummond was given the day off. Genevieve had suggested it 2 days earlier, mentioning that she herself would be out most of the day and there was no sense in the woman rattling around alone. Mrs. Drummond, who had kind eyes and who Genevieve suspected understood more about the household than she ever said, had nodded and thanked her and asked no questions. Genevieve came downstairs at 9 in the morning, with her coat on, and her trunk at the foot of the stairs. She stood in the front hallway for a moment. The grandfather clock ticked. The parlor smelled of last night's fire. Everything was exactly as it had always been, well ordered, well kept, a testament to her invisible labor, and she thought, "I have been very good at this. That is worth something, just not to him." She did not leave a note immediately. She stood in the study for a moment. His study, with his papers and his ledgers and his familiar clutter, and she wrote 4 sentences on his writing paper, which she thought was appropriate. "I have heard what you truly think of me. I have thought carefully about what I truly think of this arrangement. I will not be returning. I wish you well, and I mean that. Not as a pleasantry, but because I am done spending my feeling on you either way." She left it on his desk where he would find it before supper. Then she picked up her trunk, walked out the front door into the sharp December air, and took a cab to the station. The train left Kingston at 11:45. She sat by the window and watched the city disappear into the gray winter countryside, and she did not cry. She had thought she might. But what she felt instead was something stranger and quieter, a loosening in her chest, like a knot she had been holding so long she had forgotten it was there. Philippa met her at the Halifax station with no fuss and a good wool coat, and the directness Genevieve had always found both alarming and deeply full about her cousin. "You look thin," Philippa said by way of greeting. "I'm fine," Genevieve said. "The east bedroom gets the morning light. You'll like it." Philippa took one end of the trunk without being asked. "Are you hungry?" "Yes." "Good. I made soup, that was all." No questions about William, not that night. No performance of sympathy. No asking her to explain herself or justify herself or account for the decision she had made. Philippa simply made soup and showed her the east bedroom and said that breakfast was at 7:30 if she wanted it, and left her alone to sleep. Genevieve lay in the east bedroom, with the unfamiliar sounds of a different house around her, different pipes, different wind at the windows. And she thought that this was the first night in 4 years she had gone to sleep without listening for William's boots on the stairs. The silence was not lonely. It was just silence. Her own. She had been in Halifax for 2 weeks when her father's letter arrived. She had expected it. What she had not quite anticipated was the tone, not anger, exactly, but a particular kind of wounded bewilderment. The tone of a man who has arranged something with care and finds it has been returned without acknowledgement of the effort. He wrote that she had put the family in a difficult position. He wrote that William was a respected man. He wrote the phrase, "These things are done privately," twice, which she thought was revealing. She wrote back. She did not write in anger because she was not angry at her father. He was a man of his time and his class and his understanding, and she had known this for as long as she had known him. She wrote clearly. She told him that she was safe, and that she was working, and that she would not be returning to Kingston. She told him she bore William no malice, and asked him to convey that, if he was willing. She thanked him for the things he had given her that were genuinely worth thanking him for, which were real and not nothing. An education, a love of books, a stubbornness he had always called difficult, and which she now understood was simply hers. She told him she hoped he would write again when he was ready. He did not write for 3 months. Then he did, and the letter was shorter and quieter than the first, and it did not mention William at all. The lending library occupied the ground floor of Philippa's tall, narrow house on Agricola Street, and it was in a state of cheerful organizational chaos that Genevieve found immediately comprehensible. There were systems in place. Philippa was not without systems. But the systems had outgrown their original logic, and what was needed was someone to think carefully about how books moved through a space, and how people looked for things they didn't quite know they were looking for. Genevieve understood this. She had been managing a household's invisible logistics for 4 years. A library was not so different, except that here, the work was visible, and it was hers. She started with the catalog. 3 weeks of work that required patience and attention, and a willingness to handle a great many dusty volumes without complaint. Philippa brought her tea and occasionally looked over her shoulder and said things like, "I see what you're doing there," in a tone that suggested she approved. There were other women who came regularly to the library. Mrs. Neville, who was raising 4 children alone since her husband's accident, and who read everything she could get her hands on, and returned every book with a small handwritten note tucked inside about what she had thought of it, which Genevieve began to look forward to, with an intensity that surprised her. A young woman named Thea, 19, studying on her own because she had not been admitted to the college, who came twice a week and asked very good questions, and to whom Genevieve began quietly directing specific volumes she thought would be useful. Miss Ruth Cairns, who was 74, and who had been coming to this library since it was their great-aunt's sitting room, and who sat in the chair by the window on Thursday afternoons, and told Genevieve without being asked that she was doing very well, which was an opinion Genevieve received with more gratitude than she expected. This was the thing she had not anticipated about Halifax, about this particular life, the accumulation of small ordinary moments that turned out to be the actual substance of things. The morning light in the east bedroom, soup at the end of a long day. Women who read carefully and thought about what they had read and talked to each other about it. The specific pleasure of finding exactly the right shelf for a book. She had not known, in Kingston, that she was capable of being content. She had managed so carefully for so long that she had stopped noticing what she actually wanted. Here, wanting things seemed possible again. Small things at first, a particular tea she liked, time to read in the evenings, the Thursday conversation with Miss Cairns. Then larger things, slowly, like the thought that she might want to stay. Not because she had to, but because she had chosen it. She did not hear from William directly for 8 months. When his letter came, it was brief and formal, written in the careful tone of a man communicating through the thing, rather than to it. He wrote, in consultation with a solicitor regarding the formal dissolution of their arrangement. He wished this to proceed quietly. He wished her no ill. He asked her to sign certain papers his solicitor would send. She read it twice, sitting at the library desk with the morning sun coming through the front window and Philippa making noise somewhere in the kitchen overhead. She felt, and this was the strange thing, the thing she had not expected, almost nothing. Not relief exactly, though there was some of that. Not triumph. Just a kind of settled acknowledgement. Yes, this is how it ends. This is right. She wrote back the same day. She said she was in agreement, that she would sign what needed signing, and that she had one condition. She wanted her mother's brooch returned, the one she had sold before leaving Kingston. She knew he would not know which one she meant. He had never looked at it. She told him the exact description. She did not explain why she had sold it or how it had come back to her. It had, through a particular piece of luck, and some inquiry to the pawnbroker on Princess Street who had been decent about the matter. She simply asked for the thing she wanted, because she had learned that asking clearly for what you wanted was not a character flaw. He sent it, with no note. Which was, she thought, exactly right. The formal dissolution, she had taken to calling it that, the word divorce being one her father still could not quite write in a letter, was completed in the spring. The papers were signed, witnessed by Philippa and Miss Cairns, who took the occasion very seriously and dressed appropriately, which Genevieve appreciated. Philippa made her favorite soup that evening, leek and potato, from their grandmother's recipe, and they ate together at the kitchen table with the window open to the April evening. "How do you feel?" Philippa asked. Genevieve considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Like myself," she said finally, "which is different from how I've felt for a long time." Philippa passed her the bread without ceremony. "Good," she said. "That's the point." By the following autumn, Genevieve had begun teaching. Not formally, there was no position, no institution that would have her in an official capacity, but Thea had mentioned, one afternoon, that she had two friends in similar circumstances, women who wanted to read more seriously, to learn things they had not been taught, and Genevieve had said, without entirely meaning to, that she could help with that, if they wanted. The group started with 3 women at the kitchen table on Wednesday evenings. Within 2 months there were 7. They read history and natural science and poetry, and occasionally argued heatedly about what they had read, which Genevieve found more satisfying than she had words for. She did not call it a school because it was not a school, formally. She thought of it, privately, as the thing that had been there all along, her capacity for organizing and managing, and making a space where people could think clearly, finally being used for something that required all of it. She wrote to her father about the Wednesday evenings. She wrote carefully, knowing what he would think, trying to find the shape of it that might reach him. She was not sure it did, entirely, but he wrote back, and the letter mentioned, briefly, that he had always thought she had a good head, which was, from him, considerable. She did not write to William. There was nothing to say. He existed somewhere in Kingston in his good wool suit with his ledgers and his club dinners, and she wished him, genuinely, whatever small contentments were available to a man of his particular limitations. She bore him nothing. Not even the weight of her resentment, which had turned out to be less than she expected. Not because what he had done was small, but because she had stopped carrying it. You can only carry a thing for so long before you understand that you are the one choosing to carry it. She kept the east bedroom in Philippa's house for 3 years. Then, on the strength of what she had saved, and a modest inheritance from their great-aunt that she and Philippa divided equally, she took the lease on a small property on South Street. 2 floors, good light, a room downstairs that could hold 20 people if they didn't mind sitting close. She painted the front door green, which she had always wanted to do and never had. She hung her grandmother's recipe journal on the kitchen wall, framed, because it deserved to be seen. She ordered her books onto shelves she had built herself, with Philippa's assistance and a certain amount of creative language about the proper way to drive a nail. The Wednesday evening group moved to South Street. It grew. She began a small Saturday afternoon session, for younger women. Thea organized it, which freed Genevieve to think about what they were building, rather than how to run it. Miss Cairns came to the first session on South Street and sat in the chair by the window, which Genevieve had positioned there deliberately, and declared everything satisfactory in the particular way. Miss Cairns declared things satisfactory, with the full weight of a woman who had been paying attention for 74 years, and knew what she was looking at. Genevieve stood in the doorway of the downstairs room one Saturday afternoon in October and watched the women gathered there, reading, arguing, helping each other with sentences they couldn't parse or ideas they couldn't quite hold, and she thought of the front hallway of the house on Carver Street. The tick of the clock, the smell of wood smoke, the particular quality of silence in a life that had been managed perfectly and felt nothing. She thought, I was not unhappy because I did not know how to be happy. I was unhappy because I was using all of myself to keep something else alive that didn't deserve the effort. The thought arrived quietly, the way true things tend to arrive, without fanfare, without the feeling that anything dramatic had happened, just the understanding, standing in her own doorway in October light, that she had found the shape of her actual life. Not the one that had been arranged for her, not the one she had endured, but the one she had built, one Tuesday morning and one practical decision and one Wednesday evening at a time. She went back inside. There was tea to make, and a conversation she had been meaning to join, and the October light was very good on the room's south wall, and she had a great deal of work still to do, and she was glad of it.